I'm Eris, writer for Bad Astra, and today I got to interview Professor Peter Steeves, emeritus professor of philosophy, as well as the emeritus director of the DePaul Humanities Center at DePaul University, Chicago, Illinois, which is my alma mater. So, welcome to Chaos Hour or Bad Astra. Both? Both is good. So, Professor Peter Steve specializes in phenomenology, ethics, aesthetics, and the philosophy of science. His study of physics started in undergrad, but he's continued his studies since, including his cosmology study group with the chair of the Department of Physics back at DePaul. He received the United States Presidential Medallion, the National Society of Art and Letters Award for Literature, and is one of the top 15 best professors in the US, according to Rate My Professor. He's a founding member of the Google Energy Project at NASA, was a member of an astrobiology research group at the NASA Ames Research Center, and currently focuses on cosmology and astrobiology. If you want to check out his ninth book, which is out now, it is Being in Showtime, which is going to be linked in the description box down below. And if you want to visit the website, it gives major time cube energy and is just super fun to explore. So I'm very excited to introduce you to one of the coolest people I know and someone that I am honored to be able to talk to frequently about philosophy.
So, first question, you went from physics to philosophy. How did that happen?
Well, there's an extremely long version of the story, and then there's the version that I can tell you in just a couple seconds. And that is that I have, for my whole life, just been interested in the largest possible questions that there are. You know, that big set of questions about why are we here? What does all this mean? How did it start? Where's it all going? The meaning of everything sorts of questions. And I thought that I would investigate those in physics, and especially cosmology. And I came to realize that there are certain limitations to that, and that perhaps philosophy would allow me to ask those questions on a deeper level. But the truth is that it's not like I rejected physics or that I think philosophy is better. I think that we have to put them all together. And there are lots of pressures in our society to specialize and do only one thing. And those are horrible, horrible pressures that we have. And the more we fight them, the better off we're going to be. So I think we can put all these sorts of things together and hopefully get at some of these huge questions.
Yeah, I mean, I completely understand. I also am trying to do multiple things with a system that only wants you to do one. So, since you brought it up, the limitations of science in terms of a lot of these big questions, just because we don't necessarily have definitive answers for everything. So, where does philosophy have to come in where science is concerned?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And so first I'll say I wouldn't say that philosophy has to come in to rescue science or correct it. I think there has to be dialogue. I really believe that when I collaborate with people who are doing physics, who are in of the right mindset, you know, who want to do real collaboration, that we're going to get a lot farther than just doing one or the other. That being said, I think that philosophy can help think about some of the preconceptions behind the questions, some of the ideas behind the concepts. It gets at that meta level where when you're doing science, you just sometimes have to really bear down and just focus on one particular thing, and philosophy can help us sort of look at all of the things that you're not looking at in order to be able to ask that question. And I also think it's the case that you said science can't ever say with 100% assurance that something is true. And that, of course, is one of the great things about science, that it is always, always falsifiable. And so Karl Popper said that, oh gosh, it's going on nearly 100 years ago now, that falsifiability is really what distinguishes science from pseudoscience. And falsifiability meaning, as I'm sure you know, it's the idea not that something's false, but that something could be false. And that when you state a theory or an hypothesis, that you're also willing to state the conditions under which you'll admit that you're wrong. That kind of humility of saying, I think I'm getting pretty close, but I've always got to be open. I always know that I could be wrong. That should be there in philosophy too. It tends not to be there very much in academic philosophy. And academic philosophy is almost an oxymoron, if you want my honest opinion. But it should be there as well. And the area of philosophy that I specialize in, which is called phenomenology, which is the study of the structure of consciousness, so how the mind engages with the world, I think that it shows us that that same kind of humility is necessary. And actually, when we look very closely at the way in which epistemology works, that is, how we know things, we come to see, by using phenomenology as a tool, that all of the good stuff that we like triumphing in science, like falsifiability, repeatability of experiments, the idea that it goes out into the community and other people should be able to do it, they're all there in the basic way that the mind works to gain information about the world. So very, very briefly, phenomenology shows us that when we say this is X, that this is something, and we're going to make some claim about the being of something, or some truth claim about it, that what a thing is all of the possible ways in which it could appear to consciousness. So as we look at it from a lot of different angles, we gain more information about the thing that we're looking at. And once you get into this a little bit, you realize that there are always some angles that you haven't seen it from yet. So in Husserlian phenomenology, named after Edmund Husserl, the German philosopher who started this in the early 20th century, the idea is that there's an horizon in which objects appear. And that horizon, I really like that as a metaphor, because the horizon sort of stretches off to infinity. And because my background is in physics and math, I think of this mathematically. I think of it like an asymptotic line, two lines getting closer and closer together but never quite meeting. And the horizon of an object is kind of like that asymptotic line, like a bell curve that goes out to the edges. There's always some other experience you could have of the thing, always some other information you could get about it that is going to suddenly make you say, whoa, everything I thought was wrong. And so we discover all of this, and I'm doing it very quickly without all of the hard work, right, and phenomenology you have to do. But when we discover this, I think we also realize that there's a humility that we need to basic knowledge claims. And that is, there's a certain point at which I can say, yes, I think I know what this thing is, but because it is within an infinite horizon and there's always some other possible experience that I could have, I don't know it completely, and I have to keep all of my claims open. And for philosophers, that's a hard thing to accept, because philosophers are very much about, this is the truth, period. But that's one of the reasons that I like this continental philosophy approach of phenomenology, that it keeps us open. And so science and philosophy share that, and I think one of the things that science can get out of that relationship is not only a foundation for why it must remain falsifiable, but also remembering that sometimes when you're stuck on a scientific question, you might go back to the concepts, the terms, all of the ideas that are underneath it, the 90% of the iceberg you don't see, and the answer might lie there instead of what's above the surface. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it definitely does. In terms of phenomenology, I was recently reading, I think it's Michael Glazier's book, The Island of Knowledge, or basically talking about the limitations of science in terms of what we can study and how we can know what we know. And he mentioned that our brains are working on a delay to process the visual information because our brain doesn't work at light speed. So technically, we're always sort of like viewing reality on a delay. So that broke my mind a little bit to think about, because we have this understanding that reality is happening right now in this moment as we are experiencing it. So I was wondering how phenomenology takes into account then all of the different tools that we need in order to perform science, both at the large scale and at the small scale as well.
So that question of where reality takes place, that's been like one of the go-to questions of philosophy, Western philosophy, for the last 2.5 millennia. So it begins all the way back with Socrates claiming that you're not experiencing reality. So you might remember the myth of the cave from
Yep.
Plato's Republic.
Oh, I
And
know
that
the
idea,
cave well.
oh, the cave. I mean, so it's really interesting, actually, that all of Western philosophy begins by saying, don't trust anything you're experiencing. It's all a lie. And sometimes when I teach an epistemology class, or used to before I retired, I would begin by saying, I want to paint a picture of how Western philosophy has been at war with our senses and our experience for 2.5 millennia, and why I think that there's something wrong about that. But at any rate, that's how it begins. And when you start by saying, well, maybe we're all just prisoners in a cave who are seeing shadows of things instead of real things, which is what Plato's metaphor is all about. The prisoners think that the shadows passing by on the cave wall are actual objects. They don't realize that they're people walking in front of a flame casting those. Then it doesn't take that long until you end up with somebody like Bishop Berkeley, who was the generation after Descartes, who ends up arguing, well, maybe there is no such thing as an external reality. There is no material world because it's all taking place inside my head anyway. So the photons are entering my eyes. Of course, he didn't know about photons and whatnot, but he did know that, right, you're getting experience through light through your eyes and that it's being processed by your brain. And it seems like that's where you're constructing the reality that's around you. And so Berkeley worried that if you look at the objects of the world, all of their qualities seem to exist in us, not in the objects. And so maybe there are no material objects. And you end up with something called idealism, where there is no material world and everything is taking place inside your mind. So if you look at any quality of an object, it seems like that quality is dependent not just on the object, but on you, the perceiver, you in the act of perceiving it. So, for instance, water. Is water hot or cold? So if I ask you to put your hand into a bucket of water and say, is that hot or cold? Well, imagine you have 3 buckets of water. And this is a thought experiment that John Locke came up with, who was, I think, a generation or so before Berkeley. And he said, imagine that you put hot water in this bucket, cold water in this bucket, and then tepid, room temperature water in the middle. So hot and cold. Now put your hands in the outside ones, hot and cold. Leave them there a moment. Now take them out and put them both in the middle bucket. How does that middle bucket water feel? It's going to be cold to this hand, right? But hot to that one. So which is it really? Well, it's not anything really. It's whatever you bring to it in the act of perceiving it. So examples like that really sort of freaked Berkeley out. And he looked at all the qualities of objects, like the taste of something. Is something sweet? Well, it depends on if you've been sucking on sugar cubes all day long before you taste it. It's probably not going to taste sweet, no matter how much sugar it's got in it. But if you've been sucking on lemons all day, because that's your thing, well, then it's probably going to taste sweet if it just has a little bit of sugar in it. So the thing is not sweet or unsweet. You make it so in the act of perceiving it. And Berkeley said it works with all of the qualities of objects. So, for instance, is it okay if I have my little drawing board here?
Oh, absolutely.
All right, you can take the professor out of the university, but so Berkeley said, so I'm sitting at a desk here, and the desk is rectangular, and I imagine that if I asked you what shape is the desk, you'd say it's a rectangle. But the truth is that if I actually looked at my desk right now, I'm sort of seeing a shape that kind of looks like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? It's going to be, and if I move around, it's going to change shape depending on how. So it can take all sorts of different shapes. But the truth is that for it to be what we think of as a rectangle, I'd have to be right in the center of it sort of hovering down exactly right, like Mission
Like a bird's eye
Impossible,
view.
Tom Cruise style, right? Yeah, looking straight in the center. Why do we privilege that way of seeing it and say that's the real shape? Why don't these shapes count as the real shape? It seems completely arbitrary. So maybe the table has no shape until you look at it and give it a shape by virtue of your vantage point. And so it's a very short move from that for Berkeley to say, well, if I stand here, the table looks like that. If I stand over here, it looks like this. Over here, it looks like that. So what does it look like when I turn my back completely? Well, there's a part of us that wants to say, I don't know what shape it has when I turn my back, but that's not where this leads. If it looks like this here, that there, that when I stand over there, then when I turn my back or close my eyes, it has no shape.
Oh, so he's lost object permanence in this
Well,
scenario.
material object permanence, definitely, but in a very deep philosophical way. So, like, if you
Yeah.
want to say, no, it does have a shape, tell me how, why, and which one is real. And so that goes for everything that you can imagine: color, texture, temperature, all the qualities of objects. They seem to exist in the mind of the perceiver and not just in the thing. So then everything is in your head and there is no material world. Why believe in a material world at all? So the question you asked about how there's a delay gets even deeper when we put it in a philosophical context, in that we might have no access at all to the external world. So you have this huge debate in Western philosophy between the realists, the materialists, the empiricists, and the idealists. And the question is, do we have access to the external world? And Immanuel Kant thought that he solved this, and that was his big contribution, that the first critique is all about finding a third path. So he argues that there is a world out there, we don't have direct access to it. By the time we get it, it's already been filtered and delayed and all those things. But that's okay, because that's just the way mind works. Minds have 12 filters that they run everything through, so that by the time you're aware of it, then it's been filtered. And we have no actual access to the external world at all. So there's all that. And then, of course, your question also leads us a little bit to Einstein, because Einstein tells us that there's no such thing as simultaneity, and that time is completely relative. And the example you were using is one of the examples that we could use to talk about that too, because if we're going to set our watches to so they have the exact same time, and I tell you, all right, so set your watch to exactly 1:17 when I say go, and I look at mine, and the moment it says 1:17, I say go. Well, it takes time for that word to go through the air, for the air molecules to be compressed into a wave, for your tympanic membrane to get that, for your brain to process it, and then you say, and then you push. Well, it's long past 1:17 by the time you do that. There's always a delay. If I'm a different point in space, then I'm a different point in time than you are. So those all become problems. Phenomenology, I think, solves them in this really interesting way of saying, well, you want to say the trapezoid, rhombus, parallelogram, they're not rectangles. But the truth is that when you are standing far away from a rectangle at the edge, it looks like that, right? That's how a rectangular object looks like when you're standing in a particular position. So when I see this shape, I don't experience it as some sort of weird trapezoid or something. I experience it as a rectangle. That is a perfect rectangle, seen from a particular point of view. So what is a rectangle? Well, a rectangle is all of the possible ways in which a rectangle can appear. Could that be a rectangle?
Yeah, if you're looking at it edge on.
You got it, exactly. Might that be a rectangle? Kind of weird oval.
Yeah, probably with like some sort of lens in front of it.
Exactly. So remember, if we think of this as the horizon, then I think that most of our experiences of rectangles, if I put our experiences as x's, they all kind of cluster together around things that are sort of, like a traditional rectangle. But if we map those out, we have to remember that those lines at the end of that bell curve are asymptotic. which means there's always some experience you could have over here of a rectangle that you've never had before and say, oh my gosh, I didn't know a rectangle could appear that way. I've learned something new about rectangles. So I think phenomenology solves that exact problem that you bring up, and that's one of the most powerful features of it.
Yeah, and especially with, I think it's also really good to hear that, you know, you can have these different experiences and learn, because that gives so much of an opening to science. Even though people think that, you know, science finds the answer and then it's done. Cool. Pack it up. We solved the problem. It's nice to see that philosophy and science, even though like philosophy and science were essentially the same back in ancient Greece, like the philosophers were also scientists. So it's nice to see that that is, while it appears to be a divide now socially when we think of these two different subjects, it really is more, you know, more intertwined than I think people realize. So a lot of your stuff, getting back to your area of expertise, you're very interested in the origins of life and astrobiology. And so statistically speaking, I feel like it's pretty comfortable to say that the likelihood of life somewhere in the universe in addition to ourselves is likely, because, you know, we're made of the most common elements. I guess, would you agree with that assertion, first of all?
Probably.
So when it comes to our perception then of the material reality around us, it's constantly evolving as we get new information. So if there is intelligent life out there, how do we sort of navigate how that impacts our own experience of both ourselves and, you know, our space in the universe? You have thoughts?
Well, I mean, part of the long story of why I moved to philosophy involved me doing a program at Northwestern in the integrated science program. When they started that in the 80s, I was the first class that they did that with. But there was no time to do anything other than just science classes. Everything was determined for you. And you could take certain tracks, but everything was just going to be math and science. And I started to have the sense that I wasn't doing anything to make the world a better place at all. And so I sort of was not thinking about social, political, ethical issues, and those were very important to me. So when I left that, I didn't go directly into philosophy. I went into peace studies. And so I went to Manchester University. It's the oldest peace studies program in the country. And so I was a peace studies and English major for a while until I also decided to get a philosophy major.
Look at that. It just tracks. There's some part where English majors go, maybe I should have been a philosopher.
Well, you know, when you're doing English the right way, I think you're thinking about the big ideas in a work of literature or a poem or something, and you're trying to think about what it all means and how it means, how the language works. You're just naturally led to philosophy, which asks those questions. But one of the things that I remember, so this was the 80s, so it was Reagan time, and it was all, everybody was pretty scared of the nuclear buildup, the arms race, Star Wars, you know, Reagan's program to have lasers shooting down Russian ICBMs and all that. And I remember the director of the Peace Studies program, Ken Brown, who passed away a few years ago, very great man, said, you know, I wish that we could finally find alien life, like intelligent life. I wish they'd land tomorrow or we'd find in some other place, because it would finally pull us together here on Earth. And we'd realize that we have more in common as Earthlings than we don't, and that maybe it would be a path toward peace. And so for a long time, I thought that too. I thought, well, maybe if we do encounter life someplace else, it'll be something that pulls us together. But I'm not so sure it really will anymore, because of the cultural milieu that we have around us, which is the history of liberalism. That's liberal with a big capital L, not like liberal versus conservative, Democrat, you know,
Yeah,
Republican.
the philosophy rather than
the philosophy,
political.
right? So Hobbes, Descartes, Locke, Rousseau, and that really is a philosophy that begins by assuming what it is to be alive is to be isolated from other things. It's to be isolated ontologically, that is at the very core of your being, and to be therefore selfish, to fight for so-called scarce resources, to be worried about everybody else trying to hurt you. And so that is the philosophy that we all seem to have these days. It is the legacy that we're living. And so I worry that we would just have that response to how we interpret life elsewhere as well. I mean, look what we do to life that's alien here on Earth. We just are killing all of the animals and plants that are around us. We're destroying things. There's stuff in the ocean that we haven't even encountered yet. And that's probably a good thing, because we'd probably end up just trying to see if it tastes good, or if we could use it for the oil industry or whatever. So until we get things straightened out with how we see each other, until we realize that we really have a community and that this liberalism is just, it's all wrong. It's just bad arguments. I don't know whether discovering life someplace else is really going to pull us together in the way that I think a lot of us hoped that it would in the past. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, I have to agree, because there is, even in the sense of like, I live in an apartment building with many units, right? And I know 2 people in that building because I happen to run into them and have a conversation with them. I don't know anybody else around me. And that's my immediate community within that building. Those are the people immediately around me who most likely have very similar needs in their own lives that we could all be working towards. We could all overthrow our landlord, ideally, but it is this sort of sense of we are so disconnected from each other in our immediate vicinity, to where community really has to be sought out at this point. And also with the advent of social media, like Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, you can connect with people all across the world, yes, but also there's an impending sense of isolation, because you are not necessarily getting that same brain chemical reaction as when you are around somebody. It's a very different experience speaking to you on a screen than probably being in the same room. Yeah, so it is this sort of like hyper American like individualism that is so valued, where we sort of forget the idea of community and how, whether we like it or not, we are in a community with other human beings on this earth. The aliens that are out there somewhere are in a community with their kind, and so there's just this complete separation that seems to be at the heart of a lot of issues that we're currently facing now.
You're singing my song. Yeah, that's
We've
exactly
talked about
right.
this. You're retired. I'm going in to continue. I guess that also brings us around to you've made points in other interviews of how like even us as individual beings have like a community of bacteria and like microscopic organisms on ourselves. So I guess that question is like, how do you view community both on the like individual, like human level in that respect? Like how does that even, impact your experience, since it does kind of break my brain a little bit to think about?
Yeah. Well, community is one of those things that you don't really choose. It chooses you. You're thrown into it, and it's up and running. And the thing is, you mentioned the colonies of bacteria that are inside of us, and all the other sorts of
I feed them with
critters.
A bunch of yogurt all the time, so I'm hoping they're excellent. Happy with
me. They love it, and they're going to help you because of that, right? They sustain you.
They're friends.
The ones in your gut, yeah, and then excuse me, the ones that are under your armpits and every place else that help break down all of the sweat that's coming out and other sort of toxins as well. A newborn baby is coming out of a place that's completely germ-free. So inside the womb, it's 100% sterile, which is kind of amazing. Yeah. But a newborn baby will get sick and possibly even die a day or two later after being born if it doesn't immediately get colonized by all sorts of bacteria. So it does that as it passes through the birth canal near the mother's anus and all. I mean, but immediately it has to have those things, because if those things are not living on you, on your skin, you won't be able to leave. We need to be in symbiotic relationship with that. And because of especially the multitude of things that are inside your body that are fighting wars on your behalf, like little mercenaries in your bloodstream, and all of the stuff in your gut, that odds are that if you were to take a cell from your body, just a random cell anywhere that's inside your skin, and look at its DNA, there's a 90% chance that it will not have the DNA you associate with you. That is, it'll have the DNA of some other life form. 90%. It's amazing, right? And so we're talking about tiny little microscopic things, but we're also talking about like the little bugs that live in your eyelashes, that at the roots. We all have them, these little mites, and they go inside, and when we sleep at night, they come out and they work their way down the eyelash and they clean off all the wax and gunk and eat it, and then they burrow back into your skin. And it's like a horror movie to think about. Yeah. But if we didn't have them, we'd be in big trouble. There are some people that actually have an allergic reaction to them. Their body rejects them, and their eyes crust over and close because nothing's cleaning the eyelashes. So all of these things that are on the body, you could choose any one of them and say, well, that's the true individual. So the fact that I call myself Peter, I mean, Peter is a multitude. Peter is this walking microbial mat. Peter is this conglomeration of things. There's
You're
not
the home
a
of
real
the bacteria.
Peter. Exactly, right? And it expands beyond that. So we could find the true individual at the level of something else, like the level of the species. So to get evolution to work, for instance, you have to assume that the real individuals, the things that are actual individuals in the world, are species, not the organisms. We organisms are like cells in a body, because evolution works on species, not individuals. So you say, well, maybe species are the true individuals, and you and I are just like cells in the body of the species. Well, maybe the Earth is an individual. When the Gaia movement started in the 1970s, that was the idea. The Earth has a pulmonary system, it breathes, it has water, like it has a blood system, oceans and rivers. Sure, you can make an argument that's the real thing, and we're just these little critters that are living on it, just like the eyelash mites are living on us.
Yeah, she has a respiratory infection now.
Oh my God, yeah. And we gave it to her, right?
Yeah.
So individuality is wherever you want it to be. It's a question not of ontology, of what is the true individual. It's a question of making an ethical political commitment to saying, well, I think this is where we're going to put the true individual, and this is what we're going to talk about. So that's really important for the construction of community. And you're right to say that we're in community with other humans, and if aliens are out there, they're in community with their kind, but we're also in community with all sorts of things that are non-human. And without my being in community with them, it wouldn't even be possible to falsely call myself Peter and think that I am one thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of the liberal philosophers, if they had access to the knowledge of all of these like bacteria, I think it might break them. And I would have loved to have watched that happen.
You could hope, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess then how, since we got on the topic of evolution, a lot of what you study too is how life began. And so if we're considering this within the sort of like lens of community of all these microscopic organisms and of all of the other beings that we are with, how does that then impact how life began? Where is the origin of all of us, including my little bacteria friends in my stomach?
Oh man, this is one of my, I love origin and end questions. Yep. So the origin of life, the end of life, the origin of the universe, the end too. So in cosmology, it's why is there something rather than nothing, right? Why does the universe exist at all? In astrobiology, it is why is there life? How did we move from inorganic chemistry to organic chemistry? And that question it's been with us for a long, long time, posed in exactly that way. And back in 1953, Miller and Urey, two scientists at University of Chicago, here in Chicago, they ran an experiment where they put into a flask ammonia, hydrogen, methane, water vapor, and then they gave it some electrical sparks to represent the lightning. And they ran this for a couple of days, and when they came back, they found inside molecules that were amino acids. And so they were able to make amino acids out of this combo that they had that was not anything like amino acids. And they chose that combo because they thought at the time that's probably what early Earth was like. That was the makeup of our atmosphere. And so they made those amino acids, which are the building blocks of life. I think they found 11 out of the 20 amino acids there. And so everybody thought, oh, well, it's going to be no time at all until we set up the right experiment, and then something's going to crawl out of the beaker, you know?
That
something
sounds
will be alive.
horrifying. That's the
All you
start
need
of
are
a
amino
horror
acids.
movie.
Well, luckily there was no horror movie because we've been running that experiment now for what, like 70 years, and it's never worked. Nothing ever comes out. Nothing, not just complex life crawling out, but there's nothing alive.
Interesting.
And the reason for that is because when those amino acids chain up and they form peptides, they form proteins, that there are lots and lots of ways you can put them together. And by the time you get to have a peptide that looks like it's alive, there are so many combos of those amino acids fitting together that if they're just jostling around randomly hooking up, that they're, statistically speaking, you're not just going to have that happen. So back in the 90s, the late 90s, there was a guy who made a 32 amino acid length peptide that was self-replicating. And a lot of people say that's the most important thing for life. Now, this was engineered. He didn't just happen randomly.
Yeah.
But so far, at least to my knowledge, that's the shortest amino acid length that we have, 32 of them. So that ends up doing something like metabolizing and being able to replicate itself, the basic building blocks of life. So now think about it. We got 20 amino acids, and maybe the shortest to ever be alive is 32, a chain of 32. You do the math on that, and it ends up being there are 10 to the 41st power different combos until you hit that one, right, that can self-replicate. So if you think about that number's just, it's impossible to imagine 10 to the 41st. Our brains are not made for that. There have not been
My
that
brains
many
aren't
seconds.
made for numbers, so I get it.
Right, and there haven't been that number of seconds since the beginning of the universe.
Yeah.
Right? That's how huge that number is. So of course it's not just going to spontaneously happen. And that leads to the problem. So how did it happen? And here's the thing about Earth too. It seems like it happened really easily here. Because when Earth was very young, there was a period called the heavy bombardment period in our solar system, where planets, especially the inner planets, are just getting smacked by garbage all the time, because essentially what's happening as the Earth spins around the sun, it's cleaning up, vacuuming up all of the stuff that's there, which means that big meteors are going to hit, comets too. And some of them are so big that they just wipe out everything, bigger than the one that took out the dinosaurs. So you have, during this heavy bombardment period, massive rocks that are just going to cause a firestorm over the entire surface of the planet. If anything had been alive, it would be instantly sterilized, evaporated, destroyed.
Yeah.
The thing is that as soon as that heavy bombardment period was over, life started. Which is as if to say, it probably started long before that, but just got wiped out, and it easily started. But how did that happen? Because even if the Miller-Urey thing is right, and you can make these amino acids just out of our atmosphere and energy from the sun and from lightning, how did they bop around in enough ways to create something that happened to stumble upon life in such a short amount of time? And there's a deeper problem there too, and this is the one that really fascinates me, and that is the problem with thermodynamics. So the second law of thermodynamics, that's the entropy law, the one that says everything within a closed system is moving to a greater state of disorder. That second law of thermodynamics is probably the only law that we have in science that will never be overturned. It just can't, right? We might be wrong about everything, but we're not going to be wrong about the second law of thermodynamics. And that's because I don't even think that it's a natural law. I think it's something deeper. I think it is the possibility of there being natural law. So what that entropy rule says is that if you have a closed system, you will never get more order than what you just had. If you want to create order out of disorder, you have to create some greater disorder at a higher level. Right? So this is why if you just throw hangers into a closet, like at a closet rod, they're not going to all just hang nicely on the rod. They're going to fall to the ground and be all connected. This is why your Christmas lights, when you get them out in December, they're just all tangled. No matter what you did to try to put them nicely in that bin, they're going to be just a mess.
All of the cords too, just it's a never-ending knot.
There's so many ways for them to be tangled, but just one way to be untangled. So statistically speaking, they're going to be tangled, right?
Yeah.
It's why when you put cream in your coffee and stir it, it doesn't suddenly create a smiley face of cream. Be wonderful if it did, but it doesn't. Why? Because that's a very ordered thing, and all that's going to happen is disorder is going to increase. So you're going to have the milk molecules mixing with the coffee molecules more. So here's the thing about life. If there's just a bunch of amino acids bopping around in the primordial soup, that's disorder. When life arises, that's order. So a peptide put together in a very specific way that can self-replicate and metabolize, that's incredibly complex and ordered. That's the opposite of entropy. Entropy says that should never happen. You should just have greater and greater disorder. So the origin of life looks like it violates the second law of thermodynamics because you're getting order out of nothing. And that just can't happen. That makes sense?
But what about the heavy bombardment? You know, you were talking about Earth being a closed system. What if life came from elsewhere on a comet? Like, what if that's the answer? Especially because, like, yeah, in a closed system, those amino acids bouncing around statistically won't do anything. But it's like you've said, a closed system goes towards disorder. But Earth wasn't always a closed system when you consider the things getting knocked into it.
That's right. Oh, you said so much there.
Are we
so much
aliens?
Great stuff. Yeah. So I actually think there's a really, really good chance that life began on comets and comets seeded our planet. I think it's a really good chance that took place. I can tell you more about that in a minute if you want. But just to your other point about Earth being a closed system, that's the key there. And everything I just said before, I was saying Earth is a closed system, but it's not. So you're right, during the heavy bombardment period, it clearly wasn't, but it still isn't. We are still exchanging matter with Mars, for instance, all the time. That's how I get to have a Martian rock up on my wall, right? Because it landed here, because something hit Mars, it ejected, made its way here. So we are in a solar system community.
Yeah. Isn't there a big solar storm too coming up?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the polarization is happening soon, I think.
So...
Oh, we got the drawings out again.
Get into the drawings again. There's the sun.
Excellent.
All the way out. So all the planets, right? Mercury and Venus and Earth. And as you go out, you have a nice straight line of it getting colder and colder and colder.
Yep. All the way out to Pluto, which is the coldest planet.
All the way out to Pluto out there. And you have less and less electromagnetic radiation from the sun reaching it, and it's a very straight line. Now look at that straight line. Well, it's not quite straight, but imagine it's straight. That's very orderly.
Yeah.
That is a gradient, a very orderly gradient. Nature hates that. Why does nature hate a gradient? Because it's order. Entropy wants disorder. Entropy wants it to be closer to something like that, chaotic. And that's where everything's headed, right? Well, here's the interesting thing. When you start thinking in terms of a solar system community instead of an Earth community, then you start thinking completely different about all of this. Because then you realize that if you have the sun up here again and all the planets, instead of having a straight line, if there's life on that third planet, what that life does is it takes an energy from the sun and stores it. So you and I have stored energy from the sun in our muscles and in all sorts of other places in our body. And we're doing that because we eat vegetables that have taken that in. I hope everybody's a vegan, right? We're all just eating vegetables. And when we do that, and when you have an ecosystem that's alive, you find that instead of just reflecting back the radiation, it stores it up and it takes this gradient and messes it up.
We cause
It
the disorder.
sends out disorder, right? So you are getting order for free with the peptides that just magically somehow start coming alive, but it's not order for free because you paid the bill by destroying this gradient. So nature's really happy with that. So that would suggest that if having life on a planet is a way to destroy any gradient around a star, that probably that will happen as often as possible because the second law of thermodynamics. Nature wants to destroy the gradient.
That's
right? All just as expanding your point of view.
Yeah. That's so cool. I don't think I even like realized how the second law of thermodynamics is also like, oh my goodness.
It's the law. It's the main one. It's the one worth most of our attention, I think.
Yeah. And you mentioned that it's the one law that we will never be able to break. Do you have a law of physics that you think might be broken next? Or the one that is most likely to, be proven false potentially?
I don't know which one, but I imagine that most of the ones in physics will, once we finally solve the problem of putting together relativity with quantum theory. Yep. I think everybody knows that. Everything will sort of fall apart and we'll have to have a whole new worldview. One of my good friends, Jesus Pando, who is the chair of the Department of Physics at DePaul, sometimes when he's just teaching in a first-year introductory to physics class to undergrads, he'll have a textbook and he'll say, the great thing about physics is that everything that you're going to be studying in this textbook and you're going to be tested on and you're going to do homework on, everything is probably going to be wrong at some point in the future.
Yep.
And that's what makes it great. And that blows the students' minds, right? That someday everything might be wrong. And that's what makes it great, because it's open, it's falsifiable. Won't happen with the second law of thermodynamics. And the reason is because it's not really a law. As I said before, it's like a meta law. It's the possibility of there being law. And to really see how that's the case, we have to think of it in the way that Ludwig Boltzmann put it. So Boltzmann, thermodynamics was already around, but Boltzmann was the person who said, let's think about thermodynamics statistically. And so he put it in terms of statistics. And so he said the reason that disorder is increasing is because if you look at all the possible microstates of something, that the ones in which there is disorder far outweigh the ones in which there are order. So statistically speaking, you're going to have disorder as we move forward in time. So if you think about that, it means that statistically speaking, what is most statistically likely is going to happen. Now that seems almost circular.
Yeah.
Right? Statistically speaking, the most statistically likely thing will happen.
Sounds like math.
And it sounds worse because it sounds like it's just a bootstrap thing. It sounds circular. You're just saying statistically speaking, whatever is statistically as likely is going to happen. But the thing is that I think it's not viciously circular. I think it's deeply circular in an important way. And it shows us that we have to think of this in terms of, if we think of everything being founded by that second law of thermodynamics, that statistically speaking, the most likely thing to happen statistically will happen, it just changes how we think about everything. I think, in fact, that not only shows us why life came to be, but I think it shows us why we have a universe at all, why there's something rather than nothing. It all goes back to the second law of thermodynamics.
Fascinating. I guess now, since we've talked about the beginning, does the second law of thermodynamics then demand that there is an end? Since, like, listen, I'm immortal until proven otherwise. I can't die until that is falsifiable. But in terms of the ending of everything, like, is that also governed then by the second law of thermodynamics?
It sure is. It sure is. So there are a lot of ways that things might come to an end. There are three ones that are most popular. There's the
crunch, the freeze,
yeah,
and this tear, right?
right. So there's a rip. So things, the expansion is happening of the universe, and it's in fact accelerating, which surprised us when we found that out. It could be the case that space expands and accelerates so much so that eventually even the space between the nucleus and the electron in an atom in your body will increase. Everything will be ripped apart. That's one. There are not a lot of people who believe in the crunch anymore, I think, just because everything's accelerating so much. The second more popular one is the false vacuum. So it could be that the Higgs field, it's why things have mass. The Higgs field that's all around us, when they found the Higgs boson at CERN a few years ago, that if the Higgs field is at in a false vacuum, so it's not really a vacuum, that there might be a lower state for it, that it could eventually go to that. And when it goes to that, everything will be destroyed. And in fact, there is some reason to believe that we might be in a false vacuum right now. Some of the numbers are pointing to that. So if it's the case, it's sort of like imagining, get this again. Right, it's sort of like imagining
third round.
If you're on a roller coaster
mm-hmm.
and it goes up a hill and then it goes up another one, it's possible if you don't have enough momentum, you could go up that hill and then just get stuck here and not have enough to go up the next one. Yep. Even though this point here is lower than that point, you don't have enough. So if you were just stuck here, it's what we would call a false vacuum, because there's actually a lower point. Well, if the entire universe, the Higgs field, is stuck in what is a false vacuum, and there's actually a lower point, it could reach that lower point. It could do it through quantum tunneling, where, right, this weird subatomic thing where things just jump to a lower energy state. It could also happen with something that's really, really, really high energy explosive, like when a black hole totally evaporates, and because black holes are actually getting smaller. We just think they eat everything up, but Stephen Hawking showed that they give off Hawking radiation.
Yep.
And so when they're done eating everything, they're going to leak this Hawking radiation, and in the final moment, when it's leaking its final bit of mass, it's going to explode massively. That kind of energy would be enough for it to jump to another state. And if space itself jumps to a new low vacuum state, all bets are off. That area of space, we don't know it'll have new laws of physics, probably. We don't even know anything about it. All we know is that little bubble in space will have a firewall around it, trillions and trillions of degrees, and it will be expanding. So as it expands, it will destroy everything it expands into, and it will become the new universe. And there'll be all new laws that are operating within it. That could happen. The third most popular way that the universe could end is the thermodynamic heat death of the universe. And that's because entropy is increasing. We are getting more and more disordered. And that means that everything necessarily has to die. And this is probably the least exciting one, but for my money, it's a very probable one, I think. So you can think of it this way. Here's a very quick timeline. So in 100 years from now, you will be dead. Even you, I'm sorry. Right? Until proven otherwise, I know. Exactly. But it will happen. It will happen.
It's falsifiable, but there's...
And a couple hundred years from now, everybody who knew you will be gone. Anybody who could say they actually knew you. Yeah. Probably 1 million years from now, the human species will be gone. No species lasts much more than 1 million years. That's kind of the average for species. So Homo sapiens,
pretty young too,
we're
right?
very young. So like about 1 million, maybe.
If we don't kill ourselves first with climate
thing,
change.
Right? and everything else too.
Oh, yeah.
But that's the most we've got. So in like 4.5 billion years, the Andromeda galaxy will collide with the Milky Way. That'll mess everything up for us. It's probably not going to hit anything because most of it's space, but it messes everything up and creates the Milkomeda galaxy, some people call it. In 6.5 billion years, our sun turns into a red giant. It swallows Mercury, swallows Venus, swallows Earth completely, and then contracts back down. But that all seems kind of traumatic, but the universe still has a long way to go, a long way to go. So our star will die in about maybe 6.5 billion years, but in 100 trillion years, every single star will be dead in the universe, everyone. And in 10 trillion years, that's a long time,
Yeah.
protons decay. Right? So the basic building blocks of matter start decaying. And when you finally get to a time like 10 to the 40th power years, well, then everything is just black holes. There are no galaxies. All that's left are black holes that were sitting in the center of galaxies. So they're just sort of bopping around. Sometimes they crash into each other and make these supermassive, massive black holes. But there's nothing other than black holes. But because they're leaking, they'll leak for a while. And at 10 to the 41st power, they're done eating and all they do is leak. And as they lose that resting mass, right, they'll eventually explode, as I said before, and they'll pop like little paparazzi flashbulbs going off. That's the last light ever in the universe. But there's still a long ways to go, because at 10 to the 67th years, that's when that's happening. And all of the matter that they had is all spread out. There's no light. The universe has expanded. The protons have decayed. Everything is so far away.
Particles, then?
All elementary particles.
Okay.
And they're so far away they can't interact with each other. So gravity's not having an influence. Magnetism not having any influence. Everything comes to rest, so there's no kinetic energy. So you reach 0 degrees Kelvin, and that's at about 10 to the 100th power years. And that's called the thermodynamic heat death of the universe. Nothing moves, nothing changes, and time stops.
I guess the question is, does death mean that nothing exists, or that something exists, it is just unchanging?
So here we go. That's philosophy, right? That's a philosophy question, not a science one. And I think that time and change are so tied together that you don't have one without the other. So if nothing is changing, then we tend to say that time has stopped. There is no time. So if everything really has zero, there's no kinetic energy left in anything, so nothing's moving, it's super cold, then nothing will ever change. We call that death, but notice again, that's a human hubristic thing. It's not dead because it wasn't alive to begin with, the universe, right? We just call it death because we're afraid of our own deaths. But it's the end. It's the end of things, for sure.
I don't know how okay, so I guess because of my human experience with time not existing just doesn't make sense in that time for me, because I'm like, yes, time is still,
I know,
is still happening, just nothing's happening during.
But you know, our own human experience with time, as you say, your experience with time and mine, it may be all wrong too. I mean, there may not even be such a thing as time. That's kind of one of the things I'm interested in a lot these days, actually. I used to think that time was probably basic and space was emergent, and I'm beginning to change my mind about that space may be the thing and that time is emergent. And so time may not actually exist. The block cube universe notion of time, I don't think it's quite right, but I think it's got a lot going for it, actually.
Yeah, my mom would be thrilled to hear that time doesn't exist, so she can show up whenever. Funny enough, there was a Dimension 20 campaign that I was watching, and they asked, what is the greatest form of magic? And the answer was, oh yeah, friendship, the friends we made along the way, adventure. And he was like, no, chronomancy. Chronomancy is the most powerful type of magic.
Okay. We're on that then.
Yeah, so I guess how do you then, time is such a strange thing to think about too. So if time doesn't exist and our perception of life happening is truly just kind of like a perception of things changing that our brain interprets as time? Is that the track that you're thinking of?
Sort of. I mean, I'm nobody's sure about any of this, and I'm
Yeah,
super unsure about this.
it's very wibbly
I'm
wobbly.
leaning more toward it. It's the idea of like how if you look at a film, and not a digital one, but a film spool, you can imagine it all in a spool. The whole film is there,
Yeah,
right? But it's there in these individual frames. Nothing is moving. Nothing is changing. Each individual frame is set. It is exactly what it is. And when I move it to another theater and put it in that projector or move it into another projector, it doesn't change. It's always there, unchanging. But when I run it, you get the illusion that things are happening. You get the illusion that there's change, that someone's riding a horse and you actually see it gallop across the screen. There's no galloping on the film, right? There's just a frame with the horse here and a frame with the horse here slightly different. And so all of that is an illusion that's caused by how we perceive it. It could be the case that the way that consciousness is structured, we are perceiving and taking time as an illusion when really there's no time there at all in the universe. So the universe is set, just like the film is set.
yeah,
The past and the present are there. It's all there all at one time, right? The beginning and the end of the movie are all there on the spool.
it's all layered
So
on top of each other.
all layered on top. And as conscious beings, we then see all this changing and time passing, but perhaps it's just an illusion.
Yeah, that's just wild.
I know.
But it's fun to think about for sure.
The thing is, it solves a lot of problems, actually, because
Really?
one of the biggest problems in the history of philosophy is the problem of change, especially gradual change over time. Nobody really solved that sort of definitively. How can a thing remain the thing it is, but also be changing as it's going through time? Do you know the story of Theseus's ship?
I'm not too sure, but I know I think it was Plato, maybe, or maybe Socrates, who discussed how we shouldn't say that we are something, but we are becoming because of that constant sort of motion of time.
Yeah. So that the distinction between being and becoming, that's exactly it. And let me give you a very short version of Theseus' ship, if you want. Yeah. So the story is Theseus has been lost out at sea for a long, long time, and he's gone maybe 10 years. And so they finally say, well, he's not coming back. So we need to replace his ship for the Armada so that we have a new one. And so at Port A, let's say, they build a brand new ship, same make and model as Theseus. And wouldn't you know it, the day they finish, Theseus shows up, having been lost at sea for a decade, and he pulls his ship into Dock B. Now, his ship is a mess. It's rotted, it's splintered, things are falling apart, but it's the exact same make and model as the new one. All of his crew members leave the ship and they go off into town and they just start having a great party. Later that night, one of his crew members comes back in sort of a drunken stupor and sees this beautiful new ship in Dock A and thinks, oh, they were replacing our ship. Didn't count on us coming home. And in his drunken stupor, he decides to do something about it. So he goes onto that new ship and he rips up one wooden plank. And then he goes over to Dock B and he rips up the same plank in the same place and replaces it with the new one and then puts the old rotten wooden one in Dock A.
Yeah.
So now you got this brand new ship, but with one, nasty little plank. He goes back night after night and replaces one by one all the planks. Then the
Without
mast,
anyone
then
noticing.
every little, no one notices until he's finally replaced every single part. Now suppose Theseus shows up after a few months for the first time, and he goes to the dock and he sees Dock A and Dock B. Where is his ship? Is it
That's
still
an
in Dock
excellent
B, or has it been transferred over to Dock A? And if you want to say it's transferred to Dock A, because it's going to look like his, that's the one he remembers pulling up in, right? Well, if that's the one that's his ship, when did it become his ship? Was it when half the number of pieces were transferred? Half of the weight or mass of the ship was transferred? And that seems arbitrary. And also it seems weird if, like, his ship is here and then I move one little nail and boom, his ship jumps over here. Now this is his ship.
That sounds like a quantum issue.
I mean, well, so this is happening with you and me all the time, right? So we're losing atoms constantly,
Yeah, I think
and
your
they're being
entire,
replaced.
what is it? Every single cell in your body turns over once every 11 years, if I remember correctly.
So I have heard as few as 5, even,
Okay.
right? And if we're talking about even at a lower level than cells, atoms, those are getting switched out constantly. So let's go with the conservative, 11 years. So 11 years from now, every single piece that makes you up, every single plank, wooden plank, so to speak, that makes you, has been replaced with something else. So are you still you?
I think in terms of like the continuity of thought, it's very similar to the issue that I remember talking about at the Adler with teleportation.
Yeah.
Of if all of you is destroyed and then rebuilt on the other side, first of all, are you still the same person? And second of all, does your brain even function identically? Like, what happens to your memories? Where does that factor in? Is your soul there?
What teleportation does, what Star Trek transporters do, is that they kill you.
Yeah.
They kill you and replace you with an exact duplicate.
The one memory I have distinctly, I think it's the first Star Trek film.
More signal.
They're losing their pattern.
Oh no, they're forming.
Oh my God. Starfleet, do you have them?
Enterprise. What we got back didn't live long, fortunately.
Well, it's the same even when it seems like it's really working. No, that's a monster. It's not you. It's a clone. Exact duplicate. But no one will ever know. But it kills you. So don't ever get in a Star Trek transporter.
No. That I don't need to be in a transporter. I wish transporters exist because commutes suck, but beyond that.
So all these questions that get back to your question of time, change over time. We just don't know how to answer these things. When did it stop being Theseus' ship? When did it jump over there? Did it jump? Are you the same when you replace all the atoms in your body? Yep. Well, think about it. If there is no time, then we don't have those problems anymore. There is no becoming. Nothing's changing. Everything just is. Like every cell of the film is perfect, right? And static. Nothing is changing in it. There's the horse galloping right there, frozen. And in this cell beside it, it's slightly different, but nothing is changing it. It's exactly the same. The change is the illusion of looking at all of them quickly.
So time then becomes less, or like time then becomes less of a continuous stream and more of like just a bunch of instantaneous moments that are layered on top of each other to give the illusion of movement.
It could be. That's one way to think of it. Or it could be actually that there really is no time and that's just something that human consciousness makes up. Yeah,
so
totally.
If time doesn't exist, if the universe is going to die, if we're all going to die theoretically, what is the point? What is the answer then to life, the universe, and everything?
Well, there are 3 things to say about that. Actually, there are a million things. I'll keep it to 3. So the first one is that this worries me. It just worries me no end. It's worried me since I first learned about this when I was a kid, like 7 years old.
Yeah. Philosophers love this question of what's the meaning of life.
They love it, especially if everything ends, if everything is finite, and the universe is going to end. Like if the Earth itself is going to be swallowed by the sun, so there's not even going to be a planet. Why do we have to worry so much about global warming now? So the first thing to say is, and this is very fast, and that is that this is an existential question that is very abstract. And I think we always have to keep in mind that although it is incredibly pressing and we do need an answer for it, that there are questions of existence that are bothering people right now in a more concrete social political way with people who may not have a place to stay in the cold that is Chicago tonight, may need medicine that's easily available, but they don't have the money for it tonight, or food. So I don't want this just to become a sort of bourgeois existential exercise of, oh gosh, in 10 to the 100th years, the universe ends. If you just want a scientific answer, which is never enough, this is the meaning of life. The meaning of life is to create a destruction of the solar energy gradient. That's why we're here.
The meaning of life is chaos.
That's it,
That
right? We create chaos.
To me.
Yeah. Right, think of it, we're like little tornadoes. You know, why do tornadoes exist? So that was a big thermodynamic question too, because tornadoes are very organized. It's a thing, and it just comes out of nowhere. So how do they exist? Well, it turns out that if you have a gradient, you have a high pressure area in one area, and low pressure in another, high, low. Nature hates that. Nature wants everything to be the same. So what's the fastest, most efficient way to mix air molecules to get rid of a high pressure area and low?
Tornado.
A tornado. So we are tornadoes. That's all we are. We exist to mess stuff up, to create chaos in the solar gradient. That is the meaning of life.
That's deeply comforting too, of like, we're here to mess things up. We're here to make mistakes.
It's good because we have a talent for it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, but that's not enough.
To err is to be human.
That's not enough. That's not enough. Yeah. The bigger question is, all right, so why am I here? What am I supposed to do with this? So maybe by taking in some photons, I'm helping to mess up the solar gradient, but isn't there more to what I'm doing? And the answer is, yes, life does have meaning. It does have personal meaning, social meaning, communal meaning. And we can't let the death of everything, including our own death, and the death of the things that we love, we can't let that make us think that they are worthless.
Yeah.
Because if something has meaning, meaning is in the dative case. So what I mean by that is, if you think about it linguistically, the dative case is like if Bill gave the ball to Sue, we'd say, well, the ball is the thing that's being moved between the two actors, right? So if I say, to whom did Bill give the ball? I have to say whom, not to who, because whom indicates the dative case. He gave it to Sue. It's going to her. So meaning is always in the dative case. That means if something is meaningful, you can say, well, meaningful to whom?
Yeah.
Meaningful to whom? That means that for something to have meaning, like our life or an action we do or the universe, we're assuming that it has meaning to somebody. And I'm a somebody. And so are you. And so the fact that it's all going to end doesn't mean that all meaning is gone, because there are things that are meaningful to us right now. We have to try to fix this planet and to stop doing the thing we're doing, right? We're serial killers. We have to stop doing this. Not because if we succeed, then the planet will last for an infinite amount of time. No. But because we're here now and things are suffering.
Yeah.
Right? And I have to take care of that person who lives beside me, knowing that she's going to die. No matter what I do, she's going to die. And so you think, well, what does it matter then if I help her or don't help her? Because she'll be gone. Any record of what I did will be gone. What does it matter? It matters now. It matters to her. It matters to me. And so this is where the social political comes back. And it was always there.
Yeah.
Right? It was always there, even in the science that I just couldn't see when I was young. That meaning is us doing the right thing communally for each other now. And meaning is not something that lives in the infinite, in the being. Meaning is part of us just becoming.
I love that. It definitely brings that sort of like, as you said, bourgeoisie question of what's the meaning of life down to right back to where we started with the community as well. Yeah, that's a lot more satisfying than 42. I can tell you that.
42 is a pretty good answer too, though.
It's a really clean cut answer with a lot of different interpretations.
That's right.
At the end of the day, it seems like science and philosophy both come from a perspective of caring. You know, like when teenagers are like, I don't care, whatever, and they think that apathy is a cool thing. I think that, growing up also gives you the message of, no, everybody cares, and everybody cares deeply. It's just a matter of how that manifests in a way of like, how do you put your stamp on the world? How do you make it a better place?
Yeah. I'm with you 100%. We just have to care so much that we will work together to create the material conditions under which we can care, in which we can truly care for each other. And we don't have those right now. So that's why we need to change everything massively.
We've had conversations before in which I told you I hate the concept of money
Yeah.
and how that should be like, like we have a bunch of different, utopia-esque ideas of how the world should be and how we should care for each other. And I just came from a meeting about diversity, equity, and inclusion programming, of how we need to also focus on the strategy of how to get there. So it seems like, at least philosophically speaking, philosophers are very good at figuring out what utopia is and what the now is, in terms of connecting it in whatever perception of time it is. That seems to be where we're at now, is figuring out how to get from point A to point B.
Yeah. And when you have another couple of hours, we'll talk about that. Because I think the only path is communitarianism, community, and anarchism, a kind of communitarian anarchy where we don't have structures that do things for us, but we do it for each other.
For each other. Because that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We'll go on that tangent when we're not recording. So I have a few final questions kind of to end the recording on. First and foremost is the most important question that I ask even Astra to ask everybody. She doesn't necessarily ask everybody all the time, but is Pluto a planet? And why is your answer yes?
Yeah. All right. So is Pluto a planet? Remember how we were saying that what's the true individual? Is it the cell in your body? Is it you? Is it the species? The universe is incredibly complicated and diverse and wonderful place, and it can be carved up in nearly an infinite number of ways. What we decide to call something and then focus on and make that into a thing, nature can handle that. So we have, for instance, on Earth decided that in our time, gender is really important. So are you a man or a woman, right? Well, it's not to say...
bathrooms, too. Highest level of
tell
priority.
you all about it, right? Yep. So if you think about it, there are people who are saying, like people who are against the trans movement and whatnot, saying, well, it's biological, it's natural, it's scientific, you can't get rid of that. That's not the point. Everything, there's all sorts of things that are biological. The question is, do you want to focus on that? So we've decided to carve up our world into men and women and then treat people differently based on that. We could say, are you 5'8" or taller or 5'8" or smaller? That's real, right? That's a real distinction. And then treat all the people differently based on which group we don't do that.
Because
so
that's
the
seen
question,
as more arbitrary.
It seems, but it's not, because it's a clear natural divider, isn't it? There are people shorter than 5'8" and people taller than 5'8". So it's a real natural thing, just like sex is, just like the reproductive organs that you might have. The question is not, is this real? The question is, all sorts of things are real. If you want to make it a thing, right, give labels to it, give names to it, give concepts to it, and then have those things do political work for you. The question is, should we do that? Is it doing something that helps people or that hurts people? That's the real question. So people are always going to be better when they have more freedom. People are always going to be better when they're free to express themselves. That's the real question. So that idea of what a concept is a thing this thing? We can't answer it ontologically or in nature or science. We have to answer it ethically and politically. So, is Pluto a planet? They decided to stop making Pluto a planet a long time ago because it was out there in the Kuiper Belt and other things were pretty much the same size and it hadn't cleared out the area.
Politics of that election, I could go on.
Oh my gosh, right? So this is just, it's deciding if this is going to matter or that is going to matter.
Yeah.
But it's not really an ontological or a scientific question. It's an ethical, political one. Every question like that is, even the question of Pluto. And therefore, Pluto's a planet. Of course it's a planet.
Thank you. Ethically, it's just wrong. It's just wrong to discriminate against planets based on their size. They can't help it.
Indeed. And there might be 50 more planets out there in the Kuiper Belt too, and I can't wait to welcome them to the community.
Thank you. We need a more inclusive solar system. This is what I keep telling Astra, but she's like, it doesn't matter. It's just a planet. She calls it a dwarf planet. So I'm like,
dwarf planet.
Ethically, I have to take a stand. You've had an incredible sort of like journey from, you know, working, learning physics, working with NASA and focusing on astrobiology, then to becoming one of the highest rated philosophy professors, or professors in general, on Rate My Professor, which is real science there. You get the real opinions with Rate My Professor.
Oh yeah.
For people who are watching, maybe who are early in their careers, like high school, college, who want to be doing cool things like you, what would you say in terms of what advice to get on that path? And I'm happy to be included in that because I'm.
Oh yeah, well, I'm included in this too. I don't know what I'm going to be when I grow up. So find somebody, find a mentor, find somebody who's been thinking about these things and doing things for a while, and learn from that person, and stay out of as much of the structured education as you possibly can. And I say that with all due respect and love for the people that educated me. Some of the most important people in my life are from my public school as a kid and from college and university all the way through my PhD. But stay out of organized education and find people who are doing interesting stuff and learn from them. And you can read books, that's good too, but having a mentor, having somebody that you can ask questions to. And here's the thing, it seems like that's an old school thing, like, you know, I'm an apprentice to somebody, I want to learn out of it. But it's not. If you contact some people, very often they're very happy to talk to you about all sorts of things. And that's the way that we really learn. It's like going to the tribal elders, you know? I think that's the way to do it. And to realize that this system is set up to make you not do that. If you're interested in these sorts of questions, and especially in collaboration and interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary stuff, the system is set up to make you fail. So fight the system. Bring it down, right? Let's plan the revolution, political revolution, and then good things can come out of that. So find people. Find people who are going to be able to help you.
At least for context for our viewers, I met Peter by cold emailing him because I found his profile on DePaul's website. I was looking into their PhD program and I was like, hey, can you talk to me more about the program? And he said, oops, I'm going to retire. And I went, no, don't do that, please. And that's how I've befriended a lot of professors. I have found that just cold emailing them and being like, hey, can we talk about the thing that you're studying and incredibly interested in works wonders.
It really does. People, we forget about academia kills you, you know, it kills your spirit. But people will get excited about the thing that they're interested in, and very often they'll want to share that with you. So don't be afraid to reach out to people, even big name people, right? They have enthusiasm, and very often they'll be able to share that with you, and you can learn from them. You can learn together.
I've been stunned by the very high profile scientists who have agreed to be interviewed on this channel. I've been surprised by how one of the most popular EDX philosophy government professors, I emailed him and now we talk regularly about, political philosophy and stuff like that. So it really is a matter of if you don't knock on that door, it's never going to open.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that door will open very unexpectedly and stay open.
That's fantastic. So try to find people like that, right? Cold emailing them is a good thing. Also try to find some real people that you can actually, be face to face with too.
Yeah.
Right? In your community. You don't know what people know, right?
Oh.
You don't know. You could have a teacher who just has to teach a humdrum thing in your high school all the time, but really she's really into this other thing and is passionate about it, and you can find out about that and learn from that person. So make those connections. That's where we're going to learn.
Yeah, it all comes back to community, like we were talking about earlier.
For sure.
And then is there anything you would like to talk about in terms of the exciting projects you're working on next? Is there a 10th book?
I like that you put exciting there. So
I'm excited for it.
Well, so
I'm going to assume for everybody else in your life they're excited too.
I don't know, but when I retired, they said, well, you're just gonna, going out to pasture. And, well, I've got about half a dozen books sketched out in various stages. So I hope that those are coming together. 2 of them I think are really moving along now. So yeah, I mean, there's a book about the philosophy of anarchic phenomenological communitarianism, APC, anarchic phenomenological communitarianism. So I'm writing the APC manifesto. This is going to be about the revolution, how we get the revolution going. And I have another book that's really, it seems like it's not connected to any of this, but it actually is, but it's about religion and thinking through the Judeo-Christian tradition and thinking of it in terms of the ethics and politics of religion instead of focusing on the metaphysics, supernatural stuff, which I think is a distraction. And even kind of an idol. We create this idol that's sort of like a Santa Claus in the sky. But thinking about the ethical, political content of that and what that might mean for us living better lives. And then the third book that's sort of a partway done is a book about the origins. So it's going to be about the origin of the universe and the origin of life, the things that we talked a little bit about together here.
Oh, fantastic. That'll be great supplemental reading. Great sort of like more in-depth dive.
Right, very light reading.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed. It was great chatting philosophy with you again.
It's a pleasure and an honor, yes, as well. I look forward to our next time.
Thank you so much, Professor Peter Steeves, for joining me and talking to me some more. If you liked this video and want to continue watching things that we've done, we have an interviews playlist that will be linked down below. Also, like, subscribe, comment for engagement purposes. We also have a Patreon if you want to financially support the wild ride that is our channel most of the time. So, as always, links in the description down below. We'll see you next time.
Ad Astra, to the stars, to the stars.